Hello and welcome to Identirati Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 193. Before we get started, a quick reminder to follow IOH on LinkedIn or YouTube. Theodosia is following, so she has very good taste in live streams. The topic today is OpenID for VCI meets OAuth First-Party Apps. Our guest today is Frederick Krogsdahl Jacobson, staff software engineer at Adura. Welcome, Jacob.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Great to be here, and I'm very excited to talk about this topic with you.
Theodosia has left, by the way.
Okay, well, she wasn't that interested in that.
She didn't like being on camera, so maybe that's a good strategy. So before we dive into the actual episode, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your career trajectory.
Yeah, so as you said, right now I work at Adura, which is in Copenhagen, in Denmark. I kind of started out working in sort of general software. I worked a bit in the travel industry. And then I did a lot of medical research software for statistics about medical research. And then I liked that so much, I thought, well, I'll do a PhD in formal logic. And then as everyone else, I got sort of discouraged because nobody actually does formal verification. And so I decided to get into digital identity instead. And here we are at Idura, and I'm sort of working a lot with standards, which is the most formal thing they'll give me access to.
That's really interesting. Well, now the topic today is about verifiable credentials and using them for sort of back channel authentication. But now that you mentioned formal reasoning, I just have to ask a quick question.
Sure.
Any thoughts about CEDAR? And does CEDAR give you new hope that we'll be able to use formal reasoning approaches to maybe tackle some of these inter-domain security challenges?
Yeah, so I think in general, the trick to formal verification is to always scope it down as much as possible. Because what people think is they say, oh, I'll formally verify everything about my software. Then they realize that it will take them 30 years to do that. And then they say, well, then I'm not going to do it. So I think this, actually very specifically saying, I'm just going to do it for this thing, and this is what it's going to be about, so that you have the rules and you can sort of keep all of them in your head. That really helps, and that makes it a much more possible, to actually use it. So I think that's one of the, one of the use cases where it really makes a lot of sense to do formal verification.
Yeah, my thinking has sort of evolved in this area, and I see the things that get formally verified as like the constitutional parts of the system, like the core or the bones of the security, like the things that absolutely must always be true. Like never give the human more than this amount of radiation.
Yeah.
But you can't formally verify everything. Frederick likes a size large unless it runs small, and then he wants an extra large. Like we can't formally verify that. And if we get it wrong, then you complain, and then we fix the model.
And that's kind of the point, right, that I was maybe badly trying to make, is that you can only formally verify things once you know what it is that you want to verify. And in a lot of domains, they don't even know that. So I think policies is kind of, access policies, usually you have some sort of idea of what it is you want to accomplish. And that really helps, because then you can actually write down what it is that you want. So that's why I think, something like CEDAR, which I'm not an expert in, could be one of the use cases where it really takes off.
Yeah. And I call that declarative security, where you have to declare what you're saying is true, but then at least you know that. And in my opinion, governance is about holding the humans, the software, the business units, and the third parties accountable when things go wrong, because things are going to go wrong. So governance is about how you deal with those things that go wrong, and how you hold entities accountable, all the entities accountable. But all right, well, we have to get onto topic. So is anyone who listens to this to find out about verifiable credentials will be very disappointed.
Yeah.
I actually want to I'll dive right into it. And maybe I'll start by explaining to you what I know about OAuth first-party apps.
Yeah,
Um,
go ahead.
and then you could maybe say, okay, and this is how it's similar to the problem we're facing in verifiable credentials.
Yeah, that sounds
But
great.
so uh, we have a web code flow that works great for web browsers. But when we have applications that are mobile apps or native apps, we have no non-web redirect-based flow, and so we needed a back-channel code flow, somewhere where we could have a multi-step process where we interact with the human, and then deliver a code, which would then the piece of software would use their client credentials for to obtain a token. So then we have software identity and we have human identity sort of combined.
Mhm.
And so in first party OAuth, they basically introduce like a device state, so that because without the browser, we need some way to track. So they introduce this state, but then it looks exactly like CodeFlow. Basically, you have a back channel endpoint, which we call the authorization challenge endpoint, which the client can go to n number of times until the authentication is satisfied. You get back a code, and then it looks just like CodeFlow. You trade your code and your client credentials for tokens.
Exactly.
So how does that relate to wallets though? And wallets are the piece of software I think people forget they even exist, sort of like the browser or user agent. Like how does this map to the VCI space?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the point of wallets in a lot of use cases, right? Is that you shouldn't have to care about them. They should just sort of do it. So the thing we're interested in for the VCI space for issuance is interactive authorization. So what we mean by this is that you have a wallet. Now I'm saying, okay, I want to issue something into this wallet. So I want to get something from an issuer, a new credential. And that issuer says, okay, but before I'll let you do that, before I'll give you that credential, you have to give me something. You have to somehow get authorized to do that. And sort of the main, you can say, primary use case that's motivating for this is that maybe you have some other credential that you want to show to the issuer, and then they give you a credential. So some sort of derived credential or something that they look up. So let's say you have, if you live in the Northern Europe, you probably have a government database of where everyone lives. So if I come with my, personal identity credential and I show it to someone, the government, they can then look up where I live, and then they can give me an address credential that says, okay, Frederick actually lives here. And maybe I can use that for some other stuff. And that's kind of, so what that does is that it means that the wallet is now, sending an authorization request as an app. So you're not in a browser, you're just doing it right from the wallet, which
Hmm.
is sort of the same thing again. Then the issuer now acts as an authorization server and not just an issuer. And it says, okay, well, but I need you to do something. You need to give me something. And maybe it needs some more things. So there could be multiple steps, just as in the first party app spec. And then at some point you're sort of satisfied, and then the issuer says, okay, here's the thing you can exchange for a new credential, and then the wallet gets the credential. So that's why it's similar. And you can say, I mean, from a more technical perspective, it starts on a new endpoint that's similar. You have this auth session, so you're kind of keeping track of the flow, as you said,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't have the user agent, right? You just have the app. And then you can say that the main similarity, but also difference, is that it requires some sort of coordination and trust between the app or wallet and the authorization server. And in the first party app draft, they solved that by saying it's a first party app. So you are the same person, or the same organization.
Right.
And so if you don't trust yourself, then you have problems.
Well, I just want to hit pause there for 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
If this is a third-party app and the authentication mechanism is password, then that would mean you just gave up your password to a third party.
That's
Um,
exactly true. And
So,
this,
so that's why it has to be first party. Now, there could be a privacy protecting authentication mechanism where maybe a third party could use it, so without killing the security and privacy.
Mhm.
But um, but yes, I think that so well, wallets are in a more trusted ecosystem of issuers. So are you saying that um, um, that maybe we don't have to say it's first party, that there's a different trust model?
Yeah, so when they made the first-party app draft originally, they said it's just for for first-party apps. No third-party apps allowed. And then at some point, someone convinced them to say, well, if you have a profile that extends the usage to non-first-party apps, then you just have, you must describe how that's fine. Why is that fine? And so we can get into sort of the, you know, one of the examples they give is, well, if you never collect credentials from the user, then that's not a problem because they're not typing in a password. So, that's not an issue. And that's kind of similar here, right? Because you're presenting a credential. You're not actually, typing in a password. And so, as you say, if you are in a trust ecosystem where you can only present credentials to people who are sort of trusted in some way, they're in a trust framework, maybe they're certified or they have registered in some way, and you can sue them if they do something wrong, then that's fine. Then it's not a problem to present a credential.
Yeah.
And I think there's kind of two, so I'm just going to keep going on this. So I think there's two elements. One is, how do you trust the app? And another one is, how does the user trust the app? And those are kind of two separate but interesting questions.
And when you say app, you mean the wallet, right?
Yeah. Well, in general, for first-party apps draft. So, in the first-party apps draft, they say, okay, well, you trust the app because it's your app. You made it. So if you don't trust it, you have problems. And the user trust is because it's your app. So, they're giving you the info, and they know that they're giving you the info because it's your app.
Yeah.
But then you say, okay, well, why would I trust the app as a company or as a provider?
Hmm.
Maybe there's some other reason to trust it, and that could be that it's registered in a trust framework. For instance, it is an EUDI wallet.
That's exactly where I was going to go. I was like, okay, this is the German government wallet. I don't even think it would occur to me not to trust the app.
Exactly.
Uh,
And similarly, how does the user trust the app? So when the issuer asks for a presentation, how does the user know that that's fine? Well, it knows that because only certified issuers are allowed to issue in this trust framework. I mean, if you are in a trust framework, right? Or you can say alternatively, well, there's no passwords to type in. So, and the user will always be prompted, hey, do you want to share this information? And so if they don't want to share the information, they can just, not do it. Same as using the wallet anywhere else.
Now, this authentication that's going to happen, because you do want to show the presence of the human at
Mhm.
that time, right? Um,
Well, probably, yeah.
and the consent. Um, and so, um, so this presentation, though, is going to use asymmetric authentication in some way. So the wallet is basically a protection of a certain private key, right? And
Mhm.
so, how is this authentication happening? Or are you neutral on that because you're just saying we don't need to do this because we're just going to use OAuth first party?
Well, from a technical perspective, you have this attestation-based client authentication, and you have a wallet attestation. So that's, as you say, that's why you trust the wallet that's why the issuer trusts the wallet from a technical perspective. And in the other sense, you can say basically the issuer becomes a verifier for a bit,
Right,
right? So the issuer says, okay, I'll issue you this, but first I need to verify something. Then you do like a regular verifier flow, and then with a presentation, and then you sort of go back to being an issuer after.
right.
And
And then when you're in that sort of dynamic presentation flow, you can verify the presence of the human at that point.
yeah, because when you're requesting a presentation, a verifiable presentation, you always have, as a wallet, you usually, at least in most trust frameworks, you have to say, okay, well, user Mike, can I please share this information with this verifier that wants it? And at that point, probably you have to do biometrics to actually unlock that, or in some cases, you'll have to do something else. And you have to press, yes, that's fine.
Right. So you have the consent and you have the biometric binding. Right.
Exactly. It's a completely, you can say, regular presentation, verifiable presentation. Or it can be something else. So we're actually having extension points where you can basically put in whatever you want. So one use case that this is allowing is that you might want to scan some sort of physical card via NFC. So it might be, okay, we'll give you this credential. If you have like a physical version of the credential, you can scan it and then send that to the issuer, and then they give you a digital version of it. And that, of course, has, a human in the loop because they need to hold it up to the phone. And they also, that will then ask the user to say, probably put in a PIN or something and say, this is the information you're sharing.
So is the answer maybe that you need a profile specific for wallets of this OAuth first-party apps draft? Because a lot of times the OAuth drafts are really like, basic and don't give you enough sort of detail or context.
Exactly.
So is the thought maybe to make a profile of it?
Yeah, it is. And here I want to, big shout out to Mischa Kraus from the German Bundesdruckerei, who's made a really big PR that does that. And he's put a lot of work into this. So that's not merged yet, but that's kind of the direction we're doing right now. And there's a few elements that kind of mean that we need a profile. One is that because first-party apps assume everyone is first-party, there's no negotiation mechanisms because they assume that you're the same organization, so you don't need to negotiate anything. But for us, it's a third-party app, so we need to negotiate, well, what can you actually do? And this means that we need to define how that will work. And another thing is that in first-party apps, they have this kind of fallback version where you can say, well, actually, just redirect me to the web, or just redirect the user to the web. And this is sort of, for them, that's kind of a way to sort of, give up in some sense and say, well, we couldn't do it in the app, so let's just do the other thing. But for us, it's actually part of sort of a normal flow. So we want to be able to do multiple steps on the web and to be able to ask the user to go to some website and do something and so on. And that's a very different use case from what first-party apps has. So that redirect to web that they have will kind of need to define our own. And that's fine because they have these. I mean, of course, we also need to define the presentation one where we say, hey, we want this presentation, which is also not in first-party apps because it's not concerned with wallets, right?
So there are some trust models out there like software statements, which is used in the open banking ecosystem. And also I hear it's going final or went final, the OpenID Federation, like sort of trust chain type of idea. Is there any thoughts about including that type of trust model in the solution?
Yeah, so I mean, the interactive authorization trust model will just be sort of the same as the regular wallet trust model. So we're not defining anything new here. But of course, Federation is now final, as you said, 1.0. And there is work being done on Federation for wallets. So that will, I mean, it already exists because some people are doing it, but the spec is not final yet, as far as I remember. But we'll just kind of piggyback on that. So I don't think we need anything new here. It's more just a way to keep it in the wallet, right? Without having to go outside of the wallet to do something. So something that's kind of an interesting point is that they also have a feature we don't need. So because they have a lot of wording and language about this step-up thing. So they want you have this auth session, and you keep it and you keep it and you keep it as you keep doing more steps, and then eventually you actually keep it forever, even after you're done. And this is kind of a weird, interesting point for us, because the point of doing that for a first-party app is that if you need step-up authentication later, you can remember what you already did.
Right.
You don't have to start over. You can just say, well, I already did all this stuff, so you should trust me to just do this one extra thing.
Yeah.
But because for us, we're just issuing a credential, we actually don't need that at all. And that's kind of like an interesting thing where they say you must keep it, but we don't want to keep it. So that's one thing where you can say we're kind of pushing something back into the first-party app spec.
I see. And that sort of makes sense to me. One of the characterizations I made to you is that verifiable credentials are mostly good for enrollment. So I can see your point. When would you need to do stepped-up authentication if you're doing it one time to enroll? There's no use case for stepped-up authentication at that point of an existing session.
Exactly.
So interesting.
This is explicitly scoped to issuance, right? That's the point of this.
So I wanted to pivot a little bit off of this specific topic, which is a really interesting topic, which is really, to me, sounds like the wallet is becoming a more powerful identity app, where it can more actively gather credentials and different types of credentials. And that's an interesting model. I was on a call this week, and a solution was pitched basically for verifiable credentials to a university. It seemed a little advanced to me, actually, the idea that the university would issue a lot of micro-credentials. And so this is more of a general question, but I'm wondering, do you see enterprises adopting this? And are there any sort of early adopters who you see doing it? And have there been successes? I'm just curious, is this going to break out of government at any time?
Well, so I mean, I know of a few universities, for instance, that have student cards as verifiable credentials. And I think that's a very interesting use case, actually, because it's kind of an inherently open framework, right? University student cards are already used by tons of other people who are not the university. Everyone gives a student discount, and there's a lot of places where you can only, you get in for free if you're a student for a party or whatever, or maybe it's only for students. And that's kind of an interesting point, because I think a lot of big enterprises are kind of scared of saying, well, if I put all my data into a verifiable credentials, it means that they can then present it to other people. And why would I want that? But universities are kind of used to that, because they're, that's just how it's always been. And I think kind of identifying these kinds of patterns is a very interesting thing to do, to sort of solve this chicken and egg problem of, I can't use it anywhere, so why would I get it? But also, why would I make it possible to use it if nobody has one?
You mentioned before that in Denmark, you've been using wallets for a long time, culturally.
We've been using digital identity, but it's not been based on wallets, right? So in general, in Europe, there was this eIDAS regulation, which was supposed to make everyone have interoperable digital identities. And then it really didn't work that well. So now they're doing eIDAS 2, which is what a lot of people know as the European Digital Identity Wallet, or the EUDI wallet. And this time it's definitely going to work, is what the claim is, right? But actually, eIDAS 1, as we might call it, did work in some countries. And in particular, it basically worked perfectly in all of the Nordics. So in the Nordic countries, in Denmark, we have something called MitID, which is provided by the state, which is a digital identity. You can basically think of it as like a multi-factor authenticator, like if you know Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator. That's
So
essentially
it's an online account, an OpenID provider, basically.
Pretty much, yeah, except they don't use OpenID. They use some proprietary API. But there are, and then in Norway they have a similar thing, and in Sweden they have a similar thing, and so on and so on. And everyone uses it, right? And so one other kind of interesting topic is to say, well, if you already have this, why should you care about wallets? And I think there's kind of two reasons. So one is from a privacy perspective, wallets are much better because they have this, you have all your data on your phone or on your device, and you don't, nobody can see where you use it, so you're not leaving traces everywhere.
No
That
ID logs.
Well, compared to a centralized system, it's definitely better, and especially for things that are being proposed like age verification and so on, it's a lot better. And it also helps with reliability. So the problem is that when you have like a big centralized OpenID provider, basically, if that one is down, nobody can do anything. But if you have a wallet, you don't really need the centralized system. Each wallet can just individually talk to verifiers. So you make it less likely for everything to be down at once, which
Even
is
potentially disconnected.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a real problem. It happens pretty often. That recently in Sweden there was I think like 1 or 2 days where it was completely down. So it's not like a theoretical issue, right? And then of course, what it does more from a business perspective is that you get to put things into it, and that's new, right? Previously, it's always been the government puts things into this digital ID, and then you can read it. But now with a wallet, the government can still put things into the wallet, but private businesses and private individuals can also put things into the wallet. And this is kind of a really new and interesting thing.
So actually, I wanted to ask you, or sort of pivot into the wallet question.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see as the most common wallets? Where do you see this trend going? And like right now, I use Google Wallet,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have any other third party wallet on. So I'm curious how you see that going.
Yeah, so a lot of people are using either the Google Wallet or the Apple Wallet, right? Because they have the credit card in it, and that's the only place it can go. And then maybe if you're in the US, you have your mobile driver's license in it, depending on state and so on.
Not in Texas.
Not in Texas. Okay, well, I'm sorry.
The only reason I have to carry my wallet is because I need that driver's license piece of plastic.
Exactly. So I think what happened kind of in Europe was that we had this COVID pass thing, right? And that is basically a wallet that has one credential in it. That's essentially how it worked. And then after that COVID
Sounds
pass,
like a terrible idea, by the way. That's an app. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, but you can think of it as from a technical perspective, that's basically how it worked.
We did an episode on this called the 3 wallet problem. After the first wallet, the person's like, oh, cool, I have a wallet. After the second wallet, they're like, wait a second, why do I have 2 wallets? And after the third wallet, they're like, I'm not installing any more wallets.
Exactly. And so this is what kind of happened, for instance, in Denmark, we have a driver's license app, which is basically a wallet that only has your driver's license in it. And we have a medical card app that is a wallet that only has your medical card in it. And this happened in a few countries. And then, the idea is that this EU digital identity wallet will, be a place to put all of them. So you don't need to have more than that one wallet. But I think that people will have multiple wallets, and there's a few reasons why. So one is that you want your government wallet to have your government stuff in it, or rather the government wants you to do that. And to be certified as a EU digital identity wallet, you need to do certain things that some private companies don't want to do.
Like Apple.
Like be based in the EU, for instance, and have their headquarters in the EU. And if you don't want to do that, then, or if you can't do that, then you can't be.
I thought Apple's based in Ireland.
Well, I don't think they changed the definition to mean have your headquarters and main operations in Europe. So it doesn't count anymore, sadly. But it was a good trick. But so if you don't want to do that, then you can't get the government stuff into your wallet. And that means that you will need at least 2, right? one with the government stuff, and then if someone has some proprietary stuff that you can only get into that wallet, then
like credit
whatever
cards.
it is, like a credit card for now. But maybe in the future you can get your credit card into the government wallet too. That's not going to be tomorrow, right? Or it's not going to be.
Would that be each country's wallet on a one-off basis would have to make an agreement with Visa, MasterCard, or something?
As it stands now, pretty much, yeah. That could happen. It's not like a completely unreasonable. I mean, it's possible, but probably only some countries would do it. I don't think everyone would. And so at least some people will need to have multiple wallets. Another thing is that a lot of private companies, they want you to go and use their app. They don't want to put things into some other app so that you go open that app, even if that's a wallet. And so that's why you see these things like, like if you have a grocery store, they make these apps where they give you, a discount if you have their app and you go click
my
on it.
AGB,
Yeah. And they really want you to go into that app, right? So they're going to make that app a wallet probably at some point.
They want to know who's buying the expensive yogurt.
Exactly. And they want to have to, put their coupon codes or whatever into that app. They don't want to put it into some other guy's app. But I think
there's something wrong with that, though. That's just like, okay, they're using verifiable credentials in a different way. Then they most especially don't want you to present their credential at their competitor.
Exactly. And I think that's a very interesting, point is you have kind of a distinction between, as I mentioned, universities, which are kind of like open ecosystems. They're okay with anyone kind of doing whatever with their credential. And then you have closed ecosystems, which say, I'm going to issue it. I'm going to let you use it at a very specific set of places, and that's it. And that's not really allowed with an EU wallet, right? So, I mean, the set of places that you can use it is all of the things that are registered in the EU. So that's why I think there will be multiple wallets. Now, you might say, is that a problem, right? Because the DC API will make it possible, maybe eventually, to just say, well, I need this credential. I don't care which wallet it comes from. So I just, whatever wallet has it, please present it.
What does DC stand for?
Digital credentials. So it's not a great, name, but
this would allow inter-wallet operability. So because that is the challenge. What if I have my university credential is here, but my driver's license is here? How do I present both things?
Yeah, so right now, actually, it's not possible to present multiple things from different wallets. You have to pick one wallet that does all of it. But that is a very obvious thing to work on next for the W3C that's doing this. But yeah, the idea is that as a verifier who wants to receive a presentation, you say, I want, you declaratively announce using the Doggle query language. You say, I want this information. Does anyone have it? And then the operating system asks all the apps on the phone, hey, first, are you a wallet? If yes, do you have this thing in you? And if they say yes, the user gets a list to pick from of, okay, well, which one do you want to use? And in a lot of cases, only one will say yes, right? Because if it's a government thing, only the government one will say yes.
Right.
If it's the one from, whatever grocery store, only that one will say yes.
So, we talked about how we wanted to we want to avoid the browser because this is first party or trusted wallets. But ironically, at the same time, we see a move towards cloud wallets, which is basically building the wallet in the web, which seems to be completely defeating the idea that we actually are trying to do this first party thing, but you're actually using a web browser anyway. So,
yeah, that's true.
But cloud wallets could have the potential to be more accessible because, as you mentioned, you already have a website that you're going to manage your digital ID at your country. So making that a web browser might be the easiest solution.
Yeah, and I think there's benefits and problems, and the benefit is of course that you don't need to download an app, and also you can, because it's in the cloud, you can back it up, right? It's automatically backed up. It's like if you lose your device, that's not a big deal. You just buy a new one and then you go to the website and you're good. which is kind of a major problem with other wallets, right? And then there's a bunch of stuff about, you know, do you get updates and, you know, bug fixes and this kind of thing that is easier when you just have a website, because, you know, you update the website and everyone's automatically updated. This can also be solved with some other, you know, kind of splitting it into two parts, the wallet, so that you have some of it be cloud and some of it be on the device. And then you can do like server to server issuance, where you know, send it to the cloud and at some point it gets to the device. And this also helps if you want to issue and like especially reissue and refresh things while maybe the phone is, you know, turned off, ran out of battery, doesn't have cell service, these kinds of things. And those are all benefits of cloud wallets as well, right? Is that they're kind of always on. But the problem with a cloud wallet is, you know, you need to have some sort of, well, you need a passkey probably, essentially, right?
If you want to prove user presence and consent,
yeah,
then
exactly.
you need. So it's an interesting thread because, you know, if you have an agent working on behalf of a human, then presenting credentials might be an important part of that. And so, just like you said, there's maybe cloud APIs, and it's like a hybrid solution. In this hybrid solution, maybe you have a cloud MCP server and you have an agent on a cloud agent who's actually in charge of your credentials. Is that the direction that you think it's maybe going?
Right now, I don't think so, because people are very scared of doing that, and for very good reasons, I think. Especially when you consider that a lot of people are kind of thinking about government ID use cases and stuff like that. It makes sense that you wouldn't just give that to your, you know, OpenClaw or whatever. But of course, there's a lot of use cases where it makes sense, and especially in business use cases. So a lot of people only think of sort of, you know, personal wallets, but especially in the EU, there's kind of this movement now, and also a formal regulation about business wallets. So as a business, you have a wallet that has, you know, all your tax information and all your certifications and what are you allowed to do and all this kind of stuff in it, so that you can easily exchange that data with other businesses and with the government. And in that kind of, you know, use case, it might make sense to have some workflows where you can say, okay, I'm submitting some data or whatever, and maybe I don't need a human to actually look at it every time. It might just be okay I mean, not even an AI agent, but just like an automated business process.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot of B2B use cases. You know, you're ordering £1 million worth of steel, but actually you do that a lot because it's part of your job. And but all of that needs to be backed not just by the person, but by the company.
Exactly.
Yeah. I want to pivot a little bit because you said something interesting about how, for some reason, European citizens don't want to trust OpenClaw to like use their government issued wallet, which I find really like hard to believe. But I wanted to focus on that afraid to use, and it seemed to me that the reason that they're afraid is because they don't understand the policy behind it, or the discretion behind when those credentials might be presented. And so I wonder if we could bring this back maybe full circle to the beginning about formal reasoning, and maybe if there could be more agentic interaction if there were some constitutional guardrails about what types of things were allowed.
Yeah, and I think I mean a lot of the problem is that you need to really know what is this credential, right? To know what is allowed with it. So of course, if it's like a driver's license, everyone knows what that is, more or less, or at least they have an idea of what it is. But once you get into something like even a little bit more specialized, maybe like an insurance policy for something, you know, what is that and what can you actually do with it? And so the problem is again that if you want to, you know, in an open ecosystem where you don't necessarily know everyone that you could possibly present it to, sort of allow someone else to do it or an agent to do it, I think it gets very difficult to actually effectively constrain what can it do while still allowing it to actually do something. Because you very quickly end with a policy that says, okay, well, you can't ever do anything, which is not that useful, right?
But very secure.
On the other hand, you don't want to go to say, well, here you go, OpenClaw, here's my, social security number and everything, and go have, please go do this thing, but actually it might do something completely different, right? And this is sort of the problem with these policies in general, is you always need to know what are you talking about before you can write down the policy. And I don't think people know what they're talking about yet.
Yeah, it is. There's a million things that you can't foresee to make policies about, and that's sort of the challenge.
Exactly.
And yeah, I do think it is too early. Maybe we need to actually see some of the things that happen, or to figure out how we're going to control it. So the birds are flying, so it means it's time for last thoughts. Before we wrap up, any last thoughts?
Well, I think it's, this is kind of a, this story of how you take two different specs and align them is something we're going to see a lot now, also with policies and with what is actually a credential. And I think this is something that needs a lot of work in the future. And we're doing this work, at a European level, for instance, at the Digital Identity On Conference Europe, which is in June. So if you're interested in talking more about this, please come to that. There's also the Internet Identity Workshop, right, which is where we talked about this thing with a lot of the people who are involved, both the first-party author specs and the VCI group. And I think really that's the point, right? That's my last thought. We need to really talk about these things and actually, collaborate in the ecosystems to have everyone agree what we're talking about, and then we can find the solutions.
Well, from my perspective, first-party authentication is like on a rocket ship right now. Like in terms of adoption, like as soon as the idea was thought of, everyone was like, "Oh man, why didn't we do this earlier?" And we've been hacking the token endpoint, to do multi-step flows, and that's just a bad idea. So, Keycloak implemented first-party authentication on draft 0. So
Yeah,
there couldn't be more interest in this topic, really. I think what's, my take on what's happening is that actually the VCI group, they always take it to the 10th level and do stuff that's way harder than we initially thought about. And I think that's what's happening here. Like we thought of the basic use case, and now you guys are like, no, let's do something really more difficult and powerful with it. So,
yeah. And I think that's an interesting point to also bring along, right? So George Fletcher is one of the authors of the first-party app draft, and he said, well, we don't want to rename it, even though we kind of wanted that, because we don't want people to, do a bunch of things that are third-party and think that's okay without really thinking through what they're doing.
Yeah, I think George is right as usual. I think it's just good. Why does it say first-party app? Let me think. That's a weird thing for a draft to say, and I think that's a good starting point to make people aware of the danger of this thing that we're talking about. But it doesn't mean that it isn't the best solution either.
Exactly.
Let me quickly announce, I'll put up episode notes on the wiki page, our geeky GitHub wiki page for each episode, glue.co/IOH-193. Our next episode is another IAW-inspired topic, Ian Henderson, My Terms, which is now an IEEE standard. And so I'm very interested to hear more about that. I'm wondering why it's an IEEE standard, and how this privacy standard is going to get adoption versus the 27 years of other ones that haven't. But Ian is great, and we're going to hear that case. And this might actually be the time. Just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean it's not going to happen this time. So we'll see. We'll see next week. Well, with that, one last reminder. If you haven't already, please follow the live stream. That really helps us. And with that, I'll say, Frederick, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation, great chance to visit.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. It's been great. Thanks.